Well, excellent. All right, so I'm Emily Williams, Director of Alumni Engagement and Lifelong Career Development, and we're so delighted to have you join us today for Innovative Voices, an HGSE entrepreneurship panel. Before we get started, I have some light housekeeping items. Again, feel free to type in the chat your degree information, your geography. You will need to select everyone so that we can all see that information. We are hosting today's session in a webinar format, but we do hope that it will be interactive for all of you, and we will circulate the recording afterwards with a follow-up email early next week. Thank you to those of you who have pre-submitted questions. Alexa will be facilitating our Q&A with our panelists during today's session, and we'll be addressing questions submitted. Additionally, if you have questions pop up as we go along, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your Zoom screen for consideration. And lastly, we have closed captioning available for today's session. If you'd like to see the captions, please click on the CC/live transcript button, then click on Show Subtitle. You can also turn subtitles off by clicking on Live Transcript and then clicking Hide Subtitle. And now, without further ado, I will introduce today's moderator, Alexa Berry, Manager of Programs at Harvard Innovation Labs. In her role, Alexa supports alumni-founded ventures. She oversees the operational execution of tactical talks, workshops, and events, and manages community connections between students, alumni, and the broader innovation ecosystem. She's a wonderful partner to us at HGSE. And before the iLab, she worked in educational nonprofits, developing workforce development programming as part of a CBO within San Francisco's Unified School District. So without further ado, again, please join me in welcoming Alexa and our esteemed panelists, alumni Richa Gupta, EDM 21, and Robert Nowell, EDM 22. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Emily. It's a thrill to be here. I'm so grateful to the work from the HGSE Alumni Engagement Team. Thank you so much for putting this together. And let's jump right in. I know why you're all here, and it's to hear from these amazing, innovative voices. So I would love to just do a brief introduction of our panelists, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of some really great questions we have here today. So again, we're here welcoming Richa Gupta. Richa is the CEO and co-founder of Labia Foundation. Richa is a Harvard Ministerial Leadership Fellow and Harvard Equity and Inclusion Fellow, and holds a degree in education policy from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. We're also joined by Robert Nowell. Robert is co-founder and CEO at Rendition. He attended HGSE studying AI in education through the Specialized Studies program. Welcome to you both. It's great to see you.
Thanks, Alexa.
I'll also just add both of the panelists also happen to be part of the Harvard Innovation Labs Launch Lab XGO cohort this year, which is how I get to know them and work with them very closely, which is my great honor and privilege. So yeah, let's jump right in. Richa, we'll start with you, but if you could just tell us a little bit more about your background and what it is that you're working on now.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alexa, for that warm introduction. And thank you, Emily and team, for putting this panel together. Really, really honored. I'll quickly share, what I'm doing currently and a little bit about my background. So I started by being an educator. I started actually teaching when I was 16 years old. And so a lot of what I know about life and how much I learned about myself early on as a young person was from being in a classroom with children as an educator. Did that for about 10 years. And over the years, and we'll talk more about that, realized the need to work for children and more importantly, their well-being. With that, started Labia in 2017 along with my two wonderful co-founders. And at Labia, what we do is we partner with state governments to work on emotional well-being and social emotional learning of children at scale through government partnerships in India. Currently, we work with 3 state governments impacting about 2.4 million children across 22,000 public schools. So that's a little bit about what I'm up to currently, but I'm sure we'll deep dive.
We definitely will dig in a little bit deeper there, Richa. How about you, Robert?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. So I was previously a software engineer and had always been really a passionate learner and got really interested in CS, computer science education, and then also simultaneously AI-enabled learning. How can we leverage artificial intelligence to help students and adults and children learn? And so I attended HGSE I was in the specialized studies program, studying this kind of AI and education mix. Graduated this last spring, and now I'm leading Rendition. So Rendition, we're working to become the best way that developers bring designs to life. So if you take a software design in a tool, basically a visual representation of what that software should look like, what Rendition is an AI assistant that helps developers build that software and bring it to life in code, or also no code platforms like Webflow and other website builders. So that's kind of what Rendition is focused on, and really glad to be here and meet everyone in this panel.
Wonderful. And again, an honor to have you both. So you both touched on some of the expertise that you gained over your education and also work experience, but kind of generally speaking, I'm curious, what sparked entrepreneurship as a possible path for you, and at what point did that possible path kind of unfurl? Robert, let's start with you.
Sure. So I studied philosophy as an undergrad. I was never really programmed or coded or anything, and didn't know much about the startup world or Silicon Valley. You know, I was born and raised in Tennessee and went to the University of Tennessee as an undergraduate. But during that time, I thought a lot about kind of the impact I wanted to have in the world, and also just the life that I personally wanted to lead. And you know, for better or worse, a lot of the most interesting and important innovation and impact is happening right now in the private sector. So I observed that happening, you know, while I was studying as an undergrad. And we think about computers, internet, AI, et cetera. A lot of that innovation is being brought to life and being brought to the masses through the private sector. And so that seemed like a really interesting way to go these days. And then simultaneously, so that's kind of what set me on the path towards software engineering. After I graduated, I hacked my way into the world of software engineering. But then, you know, personally, in terms of the life that I wanted to lead, I love freedom, challenge, steep learning curves, and navigating uncertainty and really big, steep mountains to climb. And so after a couple of years as a software engineer, independently building software products and becoming an entrepreneur was kind of a clear path. You know, it just kind of felt right for me personally.
So, well, I love the quote of steep learning curves and freedom. If that doesn't sum up entrepreneurship, I don't know what does. Richa, how about you?
I think firstly, inspired by Robert's journey, of course. I think for me, when I was a teacher, the one key learning that I had from that, phase of my life was that me teaching and children learning are two very different things. And I think everyone here is from HGSE, and we all understand that much more and more deeply than I do. But I realized that I could be the best English numeracy list instructor in the classroom, but at the end of the day, given the background and the context that my children came from and my students came from, I wasn't necessarily supporting them with the skills they needed to deal with the adversities that they were facing outside of school. And a turning point for me was, unfortunately, in my journey, I lost two of my students, and both were extremely avoidable circumstances. And the reason that happened was simply because of the place they came from, the financial situation they came from, and the cultural and social cultural context that they came from. And I think it is that and the devastation I saw in their community and how it affected me and the rest of my students in the classroom that pushed me to think more deeply about what my purpose was, beyond being a teacher of 50, which was also extremely wonderful. But I think I was extremely angry, to be honest, when I started my journey in entrepreneurship. And it really pushed me to think about what we could do for an entire generation of children to make sure that no other child has to go through what my students went through.
Richa, thank you for sharing. I love the, understanding the bigger and biggest impact that you could possibly have and having that drive both of your paths. What a great way to sum that up. So for both of you, and Richa, we'll have you start off. But once you had the idea for your venture, or once you joined the venture, what was the next step? How did you get the ball rolling once you had validated that idea?
Thank you for that. So I think ours was a little unusual. Maybe every entrepreneur, I feel, thinks that their first 3 years were extremely unique, and then we end up feeling the same way. I think I started with 2 other co-founders who were extremely talented and amazing, which was a big blessing, knowing now that entrepreneurship can be an extremely lonely journey. And we honestly were very married to the problem. So we started with a deep understanding of the problem that we wanted to solve, which was the fact that children who go to public schools in India, who come from various unserved and underserved environments, lack the essential skills to become effective learners in the classroom, and that the public school system currently does not support that skill building. And the solution came slowly and in a very iterative sort of way. So we started, you won't believe this, but we started painting schools, and we realized that was not doing it. Then we started with curriculum with children, but then eventually we realized that the change we need to bring is more systemic and more behavioral. And so we ultimately decided to start working with state governments and making sure we understand that governments are the biggest change makers, whether we like it or not, especially when it comes to public education systems in the global south. And so that's how we started building the solution, and eventually understood that co-creation, systems change, having government adoption as our end game is the solution that we ultimately wanted. But honestly, we started with pretty much nothing.
Thank you for that, Richa. I think at the iLab, we always talk about falling in love with the problem. And it sounds like through the iteration that you all went through, you were really looking at the problem and trying to find the best way to solve it. And for all of you who are excited to hear more about the partnerships with state governments that Richa has done, we will have a question about that in just a little bit. So a little spoiler alert, but we'll turn it over to you, Robert.
Oh, thank you. And I think an alternative take on this, which I think can also be useful, is like when we're imagining the world of entrepreneurship and deciding what kind of business we want to start with, like one possibility is to fix the problem or fix the idea. And that helps us angle in like, oh, okay, who should the team be to help us go and tackle this problem? I think another approach is to fix the team. Right? Find the best smart, because I think that's often very difficult to find, like, who should be my co-founder, who's got complementary skill sets, who do I want to get married to, basically, and financially and like career wise and my network for the next 10 years. And so that's kind of the approach that I took personally, was first, like, who in my network has the ability to start a business, to take on that amount of risk, is hungry enough to do so, and has the skill set that will complement me, and together we can go and really achieve that. So that ended up being my co-founder, Caleb, an incredibly smart engineer that I had worked with at a startup previously, and he's now our CTO. Can build anything, extraordinary technical mind. And the reason I think that's interesting is what the market needs us to work on is going to be different for every founding team. There were other folks that I considered working with, and we could have been successful as well, but we would not have built Rendition, because Rendition, Caleb and I iterated through a variety of ideas, and it ended up being an AI-enabled solution for developers to better build software. Was the kind of thing that me and Caleb together were just meant to do. And if it had been a different founding team, rendition's not the right product to build because it doesn't leverage your unique skills and backgrounds and interests, right, and passions as well. So I think starting with that founding team can be a great approach. And then it's like, well, what would we be really good at solving? What would we be uniquely capable to bring into the world that when you're looking at it, it's like, oh, we were made to do this.
Wow, you're speaking right to a script, right to my heart. I love that. That's such a great nugget, Robert, about building that team, and what you said about finding someone that you're willing to essentially marry, right? This is a person you're going to be spending a lot of time with and working through some of the hardest problems. And so finding a person that you not only get along with, but suits and also contrast some of your expertise and your skills as well. Really, really great. Thank you. And Robert, we'll start with you in the next question. But, so as you kind of move into those next steps and even through the idea validation and creation phase, what were some and what continue to be some resources both within Harvard and HGSE and outside that you've taken advantage of to kind of propel the work forward?
Absolutely. And I mean, when I started at HGSE in fall of 2020, I hadn't even realized that it was time to start a business myself. Like I hadn't fully appreciated that realization. And so I started by just, over the summer, I had been I started kind of a nonprofit oriented peer tutoring service and went into the iLab social impact track with that idea. And through the process of leveraging the resources there, iterating, talking to other people, talking to potential co-founders, all of whom I met through Harvard and the broader MIT as well, kind of entrepreneurial ecosystem. It's how I came around to the realization that I was like, oh, okay, yeah, this is what I need to do. It may not be this project, may not be this idea, it may not be these co-founders, but this is kind of the path that I want to take for the next 5 to 20 years of my career. And so I think, resources, definitely everything associated with the iLab. A lot of things are really great, like pitch competitions and things like that. There's downsides to those as well, but really anything that I think the most important thing for me was just getting reps building products, because then I'll start to understand what does it take to solve someone's problem out in the world, right? Because if we're not solving a problem, nobody cares, right? We could have all the awards, accolades, et cetera. Like if this is not needed in the market, then the business will eventually fail. And so just getting reps and understanding the subtle incentives and motivations for our potential customers and their problem, appreciating that's the most important thing. I think that's where we all have to start.
Fantastic. I love that. I think we often talk too about entrepreneurship being a lonely journey, right? But surrounding yourself by others who are either experiencing similar situations to what you said, Richa, earlier, that you think you're having this independent and individual experience, but really there's a lot of other folks kind of going through similar lonely journeys themselves. So surrounding yourself with those folks and then getting those reps for product design is really, really fantastic. Richa, how about you?
I think when I came to Harvard Graduate School of Education, Labhya was at sort of that early-ish stage. So we were still very small. I think we were 5 team members. We were working with one state government. We were almost starting to work with another. And we had a lot of unsolved sort of puzzle pieces at Labhya. And so it was actually coming to Harvard, which genuinely looked like brought the picture together for, Labhya all together and really catapulted us. And so if you see our team sizes, the way our budgets have grown, the way we have scaled, it all was a hockey stick because of Harvard. And I think because of a couple of things. The first was definitely the iLab. And I think Alexa is testament to the fact that I may have leveraged and used the iLab to its full capacity. I think I've also won virtual awards for doing the most calls with the entrepreneurs and residents. So I think that was extremely helpful. I think we were very hungry to learn, and resources at the iLab, including the pitches, just the staff in general. I remember going from a 20-minute long winded pitch to a 3-minute pitch in my calls with Rebecca and the team. So I think that was definitely there in terms of just my own understanding of our solution and the potential of it, because a lot of what we are doing in India in the social emotional learning space is very, very nascent. And so there's not a lot of data. A lot of times we end up doing what's happening for the very first time in the country. And so it's very hard to figure out what the benchmark is. And so the professors at Harvard, the research work that I did really helped me understand how we can set high standards for ourselves in a space which is largely untapped currently at the scale that we work with. I think lastly, just the peers. I mean, no matter what they were doing and where they were coming from in the world, all of my peers at the School of Education were extremely entrepreneurial, extremely open-minded, and so much learning that I had just by being with them, just by being on, in coffee shops with them, either virtually or in person. And I think those are some of the things that really, really, really made a big difference in my entrepreneurial journey.
Fantastic. Thank you both. We're going to move to a couple of specific questions, one for each of the panelists. And we'll start with you, Robert. But based on your specific entrepreneurial journey and what you've done with your venture, you've decided to take a venture-backed approach for your venture, which is a significant decision. Can you talk to us a little bit about the process for that decision and why you ended up eventually going that route?
Yes. So in kind of at the beginning stages of my entrepreneurial journey, I considered social impact nonprofits, consumer-oriented businesses, even to the social media kind of realm, and then am now doing like a fairly traditional B2B SaaS approach to building a business. So we are building software, technology that solves a business problem. So we will sell to business customers. That was after a year and a half of thinking about and exploring different paths. My motivation for starting a company, especially this first company, is to learn how to do it, right? And hopefully be successful in solving a customer problem, right? Such that we can, you only get to learn how to scale a company if you can start a company that solves someone's problem enough to have a need to grow, right? And so for us, and what we learned is other choices are very viable. A lot of people are very successful, and often those are the bravest startup founders, because in many ways, it's building a startup on hard mode, which is already an incredibly challenging journey to begin with. Business customers are really great for learning how to start a company because they're well-financed. They have clearly defined problems. And if you create something that accelerates a process, makes them more efficient, they are financially obligated to incorporate your solution into their workflow, and they'll be easy customers to gain. Especially selling to smaller businesses to start, the sales cycle is very short. It's not 18 months to make a sale. And so it mitigates a lot of the risks. And so for a first venture, it was a clear choice for us. To do venture-backed compared to non-venture backed, mainly for us, it's like we don't have a lot of money ourselves. So like to bootstrap, right? And to go through that journey of taking on all that financial risk personally was challenging. And also software, just kind of the nature of it, it tends to work in big markets, right? Even if you try to solve a small problem for a niche consumer, like the long tail is like very large for if something really works, a lot of times it just scales dramatically. And that's what venture-backed businesses are really focused on. And so we decided to do that. There's definitely trade-offs to that. And I have friends who have been very successful in taking a smaller scale venture approach, or not taking venture money at all, and really being happy with that decision as well. And I think, Richard, like what you're saying and what you're working on is a very different choice. And I think, as we talked about it, as I've kind of said, is like, I think it's incredibly brave, and it shows your strength, right? That you're able to make it work after several years.
Thanks, Robert. And almost a perfect segue into the question for Richa. A big part of your process and lobbyist success is building partnerships with local governments and having them, really support that work and bring that work forward. Can you talk a little bit about what the process has been like, getting those governments involved and building those partnerships, and also securing your brand over time and your legacy and your trust with those governments as well?
Absolutely. Thank you. And really glad to hear Robert's, take on venture backed. I think I didn't know about that, and I'm so glad that I got to learn something new. So very quickly, what Labhya's process looks like of partnering with the government is when we start partnering with the state government in India, we sign a non-financial long-term understanding with them. The broader understanding is that A, the government will mandate the program across all public schools of the state, and B, that this is a non-financial understanding. And so the government actually pays for all the programmatic expenses of the program, like teacher capacity building, curriculum distribution, etc. But the expertise that Labhya provides to the government is actually free of cost, and we raise for that through philanthropy. And why it's important to talk about that is for 4 reasons. One is the problem that we set out to solve at Labhya was to build more ownership in government public education systems towards social emotional well-being of children. And if there is no budget line item in the government's agenda year on year for this, they might never be able to adopt it fully, like a math or a science or an English curriculum. And that dedicated those 30 minutes every single day in every grade from K to 8 yearly is also an extremely big part of that commitment that we ask of the government. Why it's non-financial is because we want to make sure that we are able to reach our goal, which is 30 million by 2030, and making sure that we are apolitical or political agnostic, making sure that we are working with the bureaucracy as equal stakeholders and not as vendors is extremely important, and was extremely important for us as a value system, and continues to be so. 3 learnings that we've had from working with the government has now become sort of our philosophy of working with government and change management, as we place people in the government. First is to acknowledge that the government is the biggest change maker with the kind of scale and the kind of control and also the kind of legacy that governments have, especially public education systems. They have the maximum reach. The second is that it's really important to understand that the system has the answers. So the government system is made of people who have been there for 20, 30, 40 years, who really understand the constraints of implementation, who understand the financial constraints. And so a lot of times we as nonprofits think that our solution is the best and we are the experts, but it's really important to actually listen to the system. Most of our answers come from there. And lastly, to transfer the ownership, but co-create the plan. And so making sure that the government owns the program. If you look at all the hoardings, the curriculum that we do with governments, you will not see our name anywhere. And that's actually by design. We want to make sure that the government truly owns the program as their very own, and we are only at the back as enablers in the silence.
Fantastic. And it's so terrific to hear both of you answer these questions next to each other with such different areas and also focuses. So really great to hear the contrast, but then also some of the similarities that you're facing. We're back to both of you, questions for both of you. As you both have alluded to and highlighted very much through your journeys, entrepreneurship is unique to each person who's taking that journey. And it can be really difficult sometimes more difficult than folks may expect. What are some early roadblocks or setbacks that you faced early on in your journey? And Richa, we'll start with you.
Sure. I think there are many, always. But I think that one major roadblock that I especially faced was that when we started Labhya and when we decided we'd start working with governments, I was very young and I was in my early 20s, and a lot of a lot of what working with government takes comes with a lot of like gravitas and even though I feel like I'm a tall person, but I feel like almost all times I had to change my voice and wear spectacles to look serious and wear a sari. So I think number one challenge was to actually get comfortable in my own skin and start believing in my own expertise and the fact that I was the best person to deliver the promise that we had given to the government. It was actually very less external, but more internal. And I think the second was to be able to invest people in our vision, given that when we started, social emotional well-being and just mental health in India was a very nascent, small topic that was always on the periphery. And it was very difficult to find support in those early years of people, both financial and otherwise, to really believe in the work that we were doing as something that had to be a core part of education. So I think those were the two major challenges. Robert, over to you.
Yes. So one model for understanding startups is you really have to solve 4 problems: assemble a team, build a solution, sell that solution, and then grow it. So far, and especially at the beginning, team and then the build phase are, you don't really need to worry so much about selling and growth. Those are helpful to validate, to make sure that your market size is large enough for the kind of business you want to create, and there's enough demand to be able to sell the solution you're imagining. But the main things at the early stage is like, who am I building this with? What problem are we solving? And is the solution that we have in mind actually going to solve this problem? And can we actually execute on it? So I'd say at the earliest stages, like those are the main things. The team, talked about a little bit. It's like validating who do I want to, go to war with, get married to. Like there's all kinds of metaphors and analogies, but it needs to be somebody that you trust deeply and who is going to bring the kind of skill set and mindset necessary to build a company with. But interestingly, like in terms of the problem and validating the solution, I think that's where I personally got the most tripped up, because it's so hard and it's a new kind of way of thinking of like, how do I validate this idea? How do I tell, there's a question in the chat, like, how do I decide what to work on? I have multiple ideas, right? And how do I do that? The iLab's actually really good at that. They focus a lot on put up a landing page and do some Instagram ads, validate if people actually want this, right? Don't write code yet, for example. And I think generally that's very much true. So navigating the idea and problem space and determining and getting like real signal through like relatively unscientific experiments, I think that's like critical in the early stage, to just not waste a lot of time pursuing something that's not going to work, because if any of those things are impossible, if you can't get the right team for it, if you can't build it, if you can't sell it, and you can't grow it, the company's going to fail. And so like, why waste years of your life, working on something that's not going to work?
Thank you both. I mean, it seems like there is this common thread through both of those stories about really intentionally doing some deep thinking, whether it's about yourself as an entrepreneur or the thing that it is, and the thing that it is that you are tackling, and the people that will be joining you along the way. Thank you for that. So I think what we'll do now is we'll grab some of those questions from the Q&A. I have one last question that I'll close us out on, but we want to hear from all of you and ask our wonderful panelists the questions that you have. And so I think we have some questions here, so I'll do my best to bring those forth, and then Richa and Robert, you can answer them, if you have an idea or a good answer for those. I like this question. Do you have advice on how to transition to the entrepreneurial world when you've been in the practitioner role up until now? Any advice or thoughts on that?
Robert, any initial thoughts?
You can go ahead if you have something, but I can chat on this for a second as well.
Okay, maybe I have just a couple thoughts, and then Robert, I'll let you go. So I think some of the primary questions that we usually have when jumping into entrepreneurship, which I had the privilege not to actually tackle with a lot because I was young, but I know a lot of folks who are here who've been practitioners, just the safety of the role, the expectations, all of that comes along. I think my one learning is that there's no better time to start than now. And I think this is probably something you've heard in all your Instagram inspirational posts every day. But it truly means something. And I think the second learning that I've had is if you're really passionate about something, go all in. And I think that has been extremely fruitful in Labhya's case, where I and my co-founders truly just left everything, did it full time for 2 to 3 years. And it was a big risk, of course, and there were many personal and professional challenges. But I think going all in, giving our full, heart and soul to something for a consistent period of time really paid off for Labhya. And so those would be my 2 learnings.
I think that's wonderful. Yeah, I don't have too much to add on top of that.
Perfect. Love that. This is maybe one of my favorite questions I've ever gotten during a panel, but we have a group of high school students watching our panel right now, and they would love to know if both of you have some advice that you would give to young people who are interested in starting their own business.
Yeah, I can go first. Start building stuff. Try to solve problems out in the world. It does not have to be a venture-backed kind of big billion-dollar idea for you to learn all the skills necessary to be really successful. If I was in that position, and thinking about starting the kind of company, like for me, it's like software or technology focused, AI, right? The new kind of hotness today. What I would do is watch Y Combinator's YouTube videos. They're very good at distilling down a lot of the key challenges that early startups are going to face. And really, it just comes down to one thing: build something people want. That's all you have to do. It doesn't have to be super sophisticated. It doesn't have to be impressive. It just needs to be create something that people want. And if there's any single skill at the core of entrepreneurship, it's being able to understand a customer or user problem and create a solution for it in the scrappiest way possible that gets them to take some action, that changes their behavior. Maybe they pay for it, maybe they adopt your software or product or partner with you. That's really what it comes down to. So you don't have to write code to be able to build products. You don't have to have a PhD in biochemistry to introduce a new solution to the market. Just practice like understanding something people want out in the world. A great example of this, today, you could start this business. Put up like a lemonade stand landing page with a no-code builder and say, I will create an AI avatar for you. You just sign up on this web page, submit a couple of photos, and I will go and use DALL-E 2 or learn the prompt engineering and create an awesome AI avatar for you. Do it for free for the first 10 people. Once you learn how to do it, you can start charging a little bit of money and you're off to the races, And so I think simple things like that. It doesn't have to be too complicated. Start small, but you'll learn all the necessary skills to like solve a user problem out in the world, and you'll learn so much through doing that.
Get those reps in, right, Robert? Lavia, Richa, anything to add?
Love it.
I think you're one in the same with it.
No, I think Robert pretty much shared in the most articulate way everything, but just one small idea is to just ask for help. I think your teacher is with you. That means they are probably one of the best teachers you will ever have, who's exposing you to entrepreneurship at this age. And so just ask for all the help that you need. I think a lot of us sometimes hesitate to do that.
Absolutely. And it sounds like you're already in the right spot. Both Robert and Richa have talked about exposing yourself and being around people who are doing some of this thinking. So just being here in this panel is the right move. We're so happy to have you. We're so happy that you were able to join today. For our next question, how much time and focus do you spend on building your network? This kind of applies, Rich, a little bit to what you were saying before about who you are and who you are as a founder. But how much do you spend building your network out? And do you think that kind of your social presence impacts your level of, or your venture's level of success?
Sure, maybe I could go, Robert, and then you. Okay. I think two things. I think one, it really depends. Networking, I feel, is a word we use a lot, especially at spaces like Harvard, because it's really all about community building. But I think the thing to talk about here would be most is the intention, and how clear and transparent and authentic our intentions are when we are building these networks. And one example is when we got selected in fall 2020 to be part of the iLab social impact track. We were very clear on, and when I say we, me and my co-founders, even though I was at Harvard, but I feel like all three of us did the degree together. We've most definitely attended all the iLab sessions together. But I think the one thing we were very clear about is that we needed to become the best people to solve this problem, and we needed to be best positioned to solve this problem as well. And we had these amazing innumerable resources, but we were very strategic about which is the community that we want to tap into, what kind of relationships we want to build. And we've also slowly got to know what is our tribe, right? So we spoke to almost all entrepreneurs and residents in the iLab, and we realized, okay, this is an archetype of a person who believes in us, who we vibe with in the Gen Z language, and who really understands our value system. And I think that's number one, to really find who is this group of people, and then just keep trying to find that type of person always, because they will always remain champions for your work. A good example is that we spoke with so many folks while my time at HGSE and build those relationships, and then many of those actually, even after 2 years of me being out of university, have recommended us to people, or have supported us. And that's not only because we spoke with them, it's because there was a connection, and we made some connections with them as well and for them. And so just finding who and what the intention is, I think, is number one. And in terms of social presence, I think it's really a personal choice, and also depends on the kind of venture that we have. I think in the nonprofit space, it's always important to amplify the voices of the work we do. I feel not because of the entrepreneur who's running the nonprofit, but because the people that we serve are some of the most suppressed people in the world, and their voices just need to be heard unapologetically. And I think from that lens, being active on socials, etc., with the right reasons is extremely, extremely important.
Thanks, Richard. Robert, any thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. I'm torn about the concept of networking. It can feel productive and also be the least and it can also be an enormous distraction. But it can be very useful. If our goal is to start a company, then we need to build a product that people want. In order to build a product that people want, we need to know people who want things and other people who can help us, right, and collaborate with as we go forward and build things. And so for finding people to collaborate with, and also finding people who have a particular problem, I would say, rather than networking, I would phrase it, Rich, as you did, participating in communities, right? And belonging in communities that connect to our passions and spark ideas and things that we are interested in. An example of an area where I feel networking is, in fact, counterproductive is investors. A lot of people, and there's a little bit of a hot take, but a lot of people will talk about, well, you got to network with investors. You got to be active on Twitter so investors know who you are, and that's the way your venture is going to succeed. I think that is 90% of the time an enormous distraction and actually counterproductive, because all investors care about is how successful is this business on track to be. And if we're pouring all of our energy into like witty tweets, we are not building a product that people want. And that's really what investors want to see most.
That's a great transition to this next question. It's related to ed tech startups, but maybe you can both just speak generally to your experience. But any advice or thoughts around raising from angels or VC funds? Or you can speak maybe more specifically to your own fundraising experiences and any advice you have there.
I can speak just about this kind of in general. I think most of the advice, like from what I've heard from friends and folks in my network, like also applies to ed tech, ventures. Like the fundamentals are the same, but the investor group is going to be different. With ed tech, it might be a little bit more foundation focused, family office focused, as opposed to like traditional VC. But there are ed tech VCs and regular VCs that will be happy to invest in your ed tech company if it's making a lot of money and like really growing quickly and things like that. In general, the VC game is very funny. And I think accelerators are a huge help. So LLXGO is a no equity accelerator type program and community, of which, Rich and I are both a part. But then our venture also did the Pair VC accelerator, which, and Y Combinator is probably the most famous. Techstars is in there too. The reason those things are helpful, I mean, the accelerators will pitch you on a lot of values, right? And investors will always say they're going to help so much. Accelerators really do one thing very well, which is drive a lot of, help you craft a message, help us craft a message that's going to resonate and pattern match to the investors that we're pitching to. And the second is drive pique a lot of investor interest at one time, so that an artificial sense of scarcity is driven and it can tap into that FOMO, fear of missing out sensibility, that because just the nature of the game is, if it's not a hot round, which is to say like a lot of VCs interested in a scarce commodity, then it's just so easy for a fundraising round to never come together. I think the last thing I would say on this is taking investment is not you selling them and you succeed if you convince them to buy part of your startup. It is equally them having an opportunity to participate in your success. And without believing that fundamentally, right, it's just never going to happen. Because if somebody's trying to convince us and the value is they're trying to convince us the value they perceive is one direction, then we're going to pick up on that on an instinctual level and be uninterested. Because if that's true, it means we don't believe our startup is going to be successful enough to make their investment worthwhile. So believe that it's bi-directional. And if not, it's like we got to really think about and work on that kind of confidence that we're coming into the investment process with.
All snaps from Richa on the bi-directional. Richa, do you have anything to add? Perfect. Okay, so I think we have time for one more question from the Q&A, and then we'll close out with just one broad question for you both. I think this is in both of your wheelhouses, so just interested to hear what you think. What role do you believe emotional intelligence has to successfully start your own business or venture?
Maybe I could go just in the spirit of working in SCL. I think emotional intelligence is everything to do with everything, actually, and it has a lot to do with success in general. I think a lot of research and science already proves that some of the best leaders, some of the most successful people, some of the most ethically run businesses have been run by the most emotionally intelligent leaders globally, right? So I think there's a big part, and I think as startup founders, as CEOs, as entrepreneurs, it's the first thing to realize that I think I had the privilege to at an early age because of my co-founders and my supporters was that being clear about who we are and what we are not going to be is extremely important, and communicating that to every new team member we recruit, every new funder we talk to. And like, Robert said, that also ensures that there is an equal power dynamic with the people that we speak with. I think for a long time, what you see is what you get, that sort of attitude and that sort of authenticity, no matter how difficult it is in the short term to practice it, is the best form of emotional intelligence that I would say for entrepreneurs would be.
Thank you, Richa. Robert, anything to add?
I love that answer. And I think it all comes down really to how we regulate our internal states so that we're able to show up and do the things that we need to do. And it's pretty much, that's true of life in general, but especially in entrepreneurship. One, it's a team sport, right? We have to get along well with other people. Very individualistic people tend to pursue entrepreneurship, but it has to be balanced with this willingness and eagerness and appreciation for working with others, be that customers, team members, co-founders, investors, et cetera. But then the other side of that, and so we have to manage ourselves to be in the right emotional space to work well with them. But the other side of that is just motivation. As an entrepreneur, you have freedom to just like not work if you don't want to. You do not have a boss in the traditional sense, and that can be very tricky because the opposite side of that is if you do not work, we will fail. Right. And so we have to be able to moderate and regulate our internal emotional states to have not just the willingness to work, but to push for years in the face of a lot of failure and setbacks and things that are not fun. And frankly, like a lot of the work is not fun. That's why people do a lot of tweeting, because that's way more fun than like trying to get on a sales call and getting rejected again, or like thinking at first principles level about why our business is like not working right now. So I think it's a lot about like convincing ourselves to do the not fun work that most people don't want to do. And frankly, if we work at Google or Facebook, we don't have to do, right? We only have to work on this like small little part and get paid well and have free lunches. So yeah, I think emotional intelligence, emotional self-regulation, like knowing ourselves and being comfortable working through our internal emotional states is critical.
Awesome. Thank you both. You heard it here. High EQ is the key to success for a successful venture. We'll close out on one last question. Thank you for everyone for posting any questions. I'm just curious to hear what's next for you both.
Happy to go first. So we're on a journey towards product market fit, and that's what Rendition is focused on. And what that looks like is using the skills of philosophy, isolating the key hypotheses underpinning our success or failure, and systematically validating that those are true, and then changing and iterating if we discover that they aren't. So what that looks like is my co-founder, myself, and our founding engineer, 3 software engineers, hacking away and then iteratively showing the product to users and responding to information and feedback as we get it. It's described as a drunken walk because if you look at it from like a 2D view, it's going to be a lot of zigzag patterns. But that doesn't really underscore how much intentionality and thoughtfulness has to go into that process to make sure that you're navigating your way through the desert in a way that will allow you to find, kind of what you're after at the end of it. So that's our current stage, and happy to share more if anyone is really interested and passionate, especially about kind of AI software products and software development.
Thank you, Robert. Richa?
Super exciting, Robert. I think at Labhya, we are going from a stage of just doing to building. And that is happening because of our goal of impacting 30 million children by 2030. And so a lot of our work in the next few years is going to be about building a great senior leadership team, about building teams across the state, scaling, of course, and finding more partners to actually partner with us in that journey. We're building our board, and so a lot of exciting things are happening. I often joke that we are growing like a ginger grows in all directions, and like some is big, some are small. So I think that's where we are. And actually LLX Geo from the iLab is a big part of that, and a lot of our goals are actually being worked on through that journey. So that's where we are. If you're interested, just email and we'll be right on call with you in the next 24 hours.
Well, fantastic. I have to say thank you to you both, Robert and Richa, for being panelists and taking the time to talk about your journeys and experiences and provide your input. We're so grateful for the work that you do and for contributing back to this community. It means so much. And as I said, I'm honored to work with you as part of the Launch Lab XGEO program and further in your lives. Thank you to the HGSE Alumni Engagement Team, especially Lisa Himmelman and Emily Williams for designing this event and bringing us all together. Such meaningful program takes a lot of really great work. And so a huge thank you to both of you for putting that together. And thank you all for coming, for our audience members, for asking questions, and for continuing to explore the world of innovation. We hope that you take care, and we want to wish you happy holidays for all of you celebrating in the coming weeks.